In today's podcast episode, I'm going to talk about some employee incentive programs that backfired big time. Welcome to the Intentional Success Podcast, where we unpack the top strategies, explore business trends, and drill down into best practices to help your live events production business grow and scale on purpose. I'm your host, Tom Stimson. Hey, welcome back, folks. Well, it's going to be another history lesson here, a little bit of the Wayback Machine. I'm going to talk about incentive programs. And it's not that incentive programs are old-timey. Some of them have been around a really long time, and they are still in use today, which is why I need to talk about them. Because when I encounter them, I'm always surprised that they're still out there and that people haven't seen what it is that they're doing and how they're getting in the way of the organization. And even if they have, they're just not sure what to do about it because, well, it was a best practice. Somebody told them it was a best practice. Probably the person who's benefiting from the incentive told them it was a best practice. Well, listen to my stories and you decide where these best practices came from and how they might need to be kept away from your business. And I'm going to start off. I'm just going to launch one over the bow here with the one that gets me wound up the most. And it's called show pay. Show pay is a concept that, if you're working in the warehouse, you get paid one rate, but if you go out on the show site, you get paid another rate. And the idea is that, show schedules are different, and warehouse schedules aren't. Shows are more valuable, and it's a way for us to pay you more money without paying you more money all the time. Sigh. So we often see this, and my first encounter with this was way back in the 80s, when I had a staffing company and I was recruiting freelancers to work for me, and I needed lighting people, and all the best lighting people worked for the biggest lighting company in town, who paid them to come in and work in the warehouse at a very, very low rate, but that made them the most likely candidates to go work on job site at show pay rates. And so they worked in the warehouse so they would get a chance to work for show pay. Now, technically, they weren't full-time employees. They weren't even part-time employees who were being paid as freelancers, but the concept was the same. And they wouldn't take shows from me because they didn't want to risk not being in the warehouse to find out about upcoming shows or being able to help prep the show that they were going to go in on. In companies, we would see this as I have technicians on staff. I've got 150 days of technical work for them to do, so I've got to find another 150 days of work for them to do that doesn't cost as much. So I pay them to work in the warehouse and prep their own orders, which means that on the busiest day of the year, everybody's out making show pay, and there's no one in the warehouse to get any work done, and it becomes a constraint. So I can't sell any more jobs because we can't prep anything because everybody's out doing a show, and everybody wants to do a show because they make more money doing a show. Nobody wants to work in the warehouse to solve the problems in the warehouse, fix processes, update systems, unless there are no shows to get done. And what happens is, and this is where show pay backfires, is when you're working in the warehouse at a reduced rate, one, you're not as attentive, you're not as engaged, you're not bringing your A game, and you are filling up the time. You're going to come in and work an 8-hour day. The work's going to fill up 8 hours unless you can come back tomorrow, in which case the work will need another 8 hours to get done. And so the work goes on forever and the party never ends. The systems never get rebuilt. Things never get done. The warehouse never gets reorganized. The inventory is never complete because there's always tomorrow, unless a show comes up, in which case we get to go out and do a show and we forget everything that we were doing beforehand and we have to start over from scratch when we're back in the warehouse. Yikes. So show pay is a disincentive. And I realize that it was born out of companies that had technicians on the staff with not enough work for them year round. Well, spoiler alert, don't have technicians on staff if you don't have enough work for them year round. Everybody should be working at their highest and best use. If somebody's worth 25 bucks an hour, they should get 25 bucks an hour all the time, whether they're using 100% of their brain or not. That day, they're still worth that 25 bucks an hour. So I disagree with that from a worker standpoint, is that we should pay people for what they are capable of doing and what they're capable of earning. It's up to us to find enough for them to do at that brain level. But where I see it becoming a problem today, as I'm trying to help companies become more scalable, is when I'm trying to make their management team focus on outsourcing, lining up freelancers for future jobs, and I find out they're not deepening their bench. And I ask them, well, why? I said, well, there's just no good freelancers out there. So what do you do instead? I'll just go do that show. And I go to the boss, why is he going out and doing the show? Oh, well, don't you know they get show pay? My operations manager made more last year on show pay than he did on regular pay. And I'm going, what? You mean the scalability project that you're paying me a ton of money to learn how to implement is being thwarted through your incentive program? And now we have a manager who we need to run this operation who is going to make less money if we're successful. How is that going to help us? Okay. How devoted are they going to be to this mission if all you're doing is, yeah, you're giving them back some weekend time, but you're taking a lot of money out of their hands. So show pay almost always backfires, right? We're paying somebody to do 2 tiers of work, one of them not very well, and another one that we don't need all the time. And it causes a lot of problems. So there's the number one. That's the number one thing that gets me wound up. Let's talk about some other ones. I often talk about commissions, sales commissions the same way. I find sales commissions often lead to the wrong outcome. And the definition of a good commission program is something that incentivizes the right behavior. But can you tell me what the right behavior is? Is it more revenue? Is it more profit? Is it the right customers? Is it well-designed shows? Or is it, I don't really know. I know it when I see it. And if we don't know what that commission is going to be until after the show is done and all the bills are in and all the mistakes are assessed that the salesperson had no control over, what are we actually incentivizing? So a lot of commission structures in our live event industry actually came from manufacturing. And they're based on, gross profit. They're based on volume. The worst one I ever saw, and it was very intentional on this company's part. This was back during the go-go 90s when companies were trying to go public. That was the goal. If you can get your business to $60 million of revenue, you could go to public. You could issue stock and people would buy it. And everybody was buying stock in the 90s because that's how people were making money. They were making millions of dollars by manipulating stock prices and trying to get stocks to catch on. And it was no different in our AV industry where we saw a lot of consolidation. Well, one company in particular where a dear friend of mine worked, he was a salesperson there. And I went over to visit him for lunch one day. And while I was waiting for him to finish up his phone calls and whatever order he was entering in the computer, yes, we had computers back then. I asked him a few questions. I said, tell me how this works. You're renting a tent for your event? Oh, yeah. Tom, this is great. I get 5% commission on everything I sell. I said, well, even if you don't own it, even if it's not coming out of your warehouse? He says, nope, it is 5% on all revenue. Well, what if you sub-rent that tent and you don't make any money on it? He goes, it doesn't work that way. I get 5%, right? I could undersell that tent and make a commission on it. I can make horrible mistakes and make a commission on it. Now, it didn't take long for the both of us to realize that the whole reason this was going on is that this company was trying to jack up its revenue numbers. It picked the best way to do that. It chose an incentive program that was going to do exactly what they asked it to do, which is increase revenue numbers dramatically and very, very quickly. Now, of course, the backfire on this is sometimes the profitability on these jobs is extremely poor. And any salesperson who chose to game the system unethically or unintentionally could really hurt the company financially because they could lose a lot of money by selling this way. All revenue was good, even revenue that didn't make money. So that's a worst case scenario, but we often see things similar to that in sales commission plans today. We're incentivizing somebody to sell gross profit, which means, oh, I don't want to sell this job because we're going to be out of video projectors that week and there's going to be a sub rental and I won't make as much commission. And so they walk away from the job. When in fact, that could have been a highly profitable job with a minor cost against it, but the hit on the gross profit commission was too high. Or the commission on revenue is tied to something that they have no control over, such as you have to hit a minimum gross profit level, which if two similar jobs are sold at the same time, there's a chance that one job could be wildly profitable and the other one could be extremely unprofitable. Another 1990s, end of 90s story I'll share about this was a large company where the account executives had seniority, and the top account executives sold $10 and $20 million worth of association business every year. They were very important, very, very powerful. And if they had a job in the system and they were commissioned on profitability, they actually had the power to change which jobs got resources. And a friend of mine was a project manager of that company, and he had just arranged everything for an out-of-town project. They were getting ready to load the truck for the next day. They had booked crew, done through the company, assigned all the technicians. And then he gets up the next morning to a flurry of emails that finds out that somebody had come in, taken all the equipment that they had prepped, unscanned it, put it on a different job, reassigned their technician, and now he was left with a job that he had to put together in basically 24 hours through sub rentals and emergency hires. Right? Now, that sounds egregious, doesn't it? But it happens so often in that company that they actually had a name for it. So having this happen to him, he just talked to a couple other project managers. Goes, oh man, that's happened to me. Let me tell you the story about all the times that has happened to me. But again, that is the incentive program of the sales commission plus some power. Now, this is not happening in your company. I get that. Okay. The point is, left unchecked, if we're not aware of what these things are doing, they take on a life of their own. I'll give you another example. Another type of incentive is actually overtime, right? Now, we are obligated to pay overtime. We don't have any, Department of Labor in the U.S. tells us that we're going to pay overtime. But in a particular company I was working with, we were having a lot of trouble getting process change on the operations side. And I had a very capable, very strong leader in the operations management role. He had come up through the company as a truck driver, warehouse manager. Now he was operations manager. He was there 7 days a week. He managed a crew of 23, 25 people who did deep quality control, repairs, show prep, maintenance, logistics, everything it took. And he directed them he and his assistant directed them every single day on how to get stuff done. What I found was this company's overtime was through the roof, and it was across the board. And of course, it's because we're so busy. We're busy all the time. We're busy 7 days a week. And more often than not, 80% of the entire crew, if one person worked on a Saturday, there was another 20 that were there. And the one person who was always working was this operations manager who, get this, was hourly. And because he was hourly and he felt that if his crew needed to work, he needed to be there, he was making overtime. He was making a lot of money, but he wasn't making more money than he was worth because our solution to this was pretty simple. We converted him to salary. He no longer got paid for coming in on Saturday and Sundays and creating extra work for people. And guess what? The need for working on Saturdays and Sundays almost disappeared. Their overtime rates were reduced by 20% in the first month and about 5% a month after that as people started to figure out that you could get the work done during the week, right? His assistant manager was pretty upset because he was making a lot of overtime too, because he could come to work if his boss was there, right? Because they had a full crew. So long story that, and a couple of other changes we made inside that organization. Now that the manager was no longer incentivized to use manpower because it feathered his nest, it kept him busy and it kept him in overtime. When he no longer needed to do that, we were able to implement other changes, such as split up his crew into teams that made more sense, get people to focus on returning subrentals, which saved them $150,000 a year in late charges because it wasn't their priority. A few little things like that. So again, all sorts of things will affect us if we follow through, see how it's changing our decision behavior. So what do we do instead? Look, the show paid thing is easy. We just need to change roles and responsibilities. We don't need to hire people that we have to find work for. We need to be better at outsourcing. You need management who's able to see the big picture of that and work on it appropriately, come up with the right solutions. You need to have staff that is on demand. You should never have hourly staff that self-selects their schedule or who's allowed, they can come to the warehouse and work 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, plus whatever hours we give them. I'm sorry, I don't know where that rule came from. It had to be from the 1970s because I never lived that life. But many companies treat their employees that way. Well, you get an 8 to 5 job, plus you do shows. Well, no, we're in the show industry. We schedule shows, and if I can schedule you on a show, I can also schedule you in the warehouse if I need you. So once you find out that there are people who are great when you schedule them on shows, and there are people who are great when you schedule them in the warehouse, you soon realize that these are two different sets of people. And now I have people who are optimized for working in the warehouse, and I have people who have optimized for working on show site. And I've solved my show pay problem and got my overtime under control and forced us to adopt processes so that I don't need a show person to prep and order, pack your own parachute, which is a very expensive way of doing business. So same thing we can do in the sales side is where we can pay people, make their salary commensurate with volume. We can pay them bonuses for team effort. There's so many other things that we can do that will incentivize the correct behavior. But the correct behavior is, I need you to sell up to and through the capacity that we have. The planning team's going to keep up with what you're doing. They'll tell you when to put the brakes on if it's necessary, but they are incentivized to do more, right? We should all be focused on the same goal, which is how much business can we do well and push through our system and do it again and again and again. Do it consistently and do it predictably, which is our ultimate goal. So thanks for letting me share a few stories with you, incentives that backfire. See if there's any in your company that you might need some help with. Happy to have a conversation with you about. Give me a free call. We'll talk about it, and I can tell you some quick ways to get that fixed. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you want to find out more about today's episode, go to trstimson.com/podcast, where you'll find the show notes, related links, and tons of other valuable resources. If you haven't already subscribed to the Intentional Success Podcast, please do so, and I'd greatly appreciate if you would rate and review the show. Also, if you think you might be a good fit to work together or want more information about the Stimson Group, I'd love to hear from you. Visit trstimson.com for more information.